Good morning to our UK column viewers and listeners. I'm joined today by Tony Shingler. Now, this gentleman I have known about for some time, and that was thanks to the efforts of his very brave wife, Nicola, who first contacted me back in 2021 on the subject of vaccinations. And she told me a story about Tony, her husband, and the fact that he'd been adversely affected following his own vaccination. And that led to a very interesting interview, which we did as an audio interview. Nicola just spoke to me. We didn't make her visible, but she gave a very detailed account of what had happened. And at that stage, Tony was in hospital. I had a little bit of contact with the family in the subsequent months, but I was only able to understand that Tony had a very difficult time in hospital. And I'm delighted that today he's very much out and about, but he's going to join us to tell the UK audience about his experiences and really what he thinks about the vaccine program. So, Tony, if I can bring you on screen and say thank you very much for giving us some time today to talk about your experiences.
Thank you, Brian, for inviting me.
I've given a little bit of the background that got going, but I just want to add a little bit more for our audience, because after we put up the audio interview with Nicola, where she was telling us very factually what had happened, she was talking about your condition, Tony. She was also talking about advice and comments that she'd received from the medical staff in the hospital and on the particular wards that you spent a lot of time on that ward. We posted the interview on YouTube. So it was Nicola's testimony as to what had happened. We put it up on YouTube. And in a relatively short space of time, YouTube decided that that interview should be taken down as misinformation. We felt that this was outrageous, because essentially Nicola had been very brave in standing up to say what had happened to you. But for us, it was compounded a few months later when the Daily Mail picked up on the story, and they printed, of course, exactly the same thing, a little bit more detail because some more time had elapsed. But the Daily Mail, for some reason, were allowed to keep their story, whereas the UK column was silenced. But the important thing is, Tony, that you're out of hospital, you're with us today. Where would you like to start? Can you take us back to your decision and then your experience following the vaccination?
Yes, it all began in March 2021. I was, like everybody else, going to work, looking forward to the next holiday with the family, so on and so on. Got my text message from the doctor's surgery to go for the AstraZeneca vaccine, the first AstraZeneca vaccine, which I did. I attended, and it was very quick, 20 seconds, and I was out of there, had my vaccine, went home. Carried on with work that next week, started feeling a bit weak. And the second week, on the second week, I started getting even worse. I felt really lethargic. My legs were aching. I was getting pins and needles in my feet and my hands. On the end of that week, on the Friday, I went to work, but the health and safety officer sent me home because I couldn't hardly walk. I tried to get into my doctor's, who said he would call me back the next day with a phone call, consultation on a phone call. Me and my wife felt that would be too late because I was in pain and I knew something was seriously wrong. So I attended my local walk-in centre, who sent me to A&E after an assessment. I went to A&E, and the first time they sent me home with an allergy, didn't tell me what it was an allergy to, but I've never suffered from allergies anyway, not even hay fever. So I came home, went through that night, got up the next day, felt even worse after that. Ended up ringing an ambulance again to take me back into hospital, and they sent me home a second time with sciatica. I've had sciatica in the past. I know what that feels like. So I knew it wasn't sciatica. I even know how you test for sciatica. I spent that night at home and tremendous pain in my lower back. And I knew something seriously was wrong because I don't have back pain. The next day after that, we actually ring an ambulance again. This time, they admitted me. My wife was on the car park talking to a doctor on the phone, begging him to look into transverse myelitis, these are the symptoms I was showing. Eventually, they did. They did a lumbar puncture. They looked at my medical records. Once I did a lumbar puncture, they found that the proteins were very high in the fluid that they examined, and decided to take me straight down to ICU. My lungs were decreasing. I could hardly breathe. I was put on a ventilator, a feeding tube, a catheter, and I was paralysed at this stage. When I was in ICU, I couldn't move, couldn't talk. My wife came to see me twice a day, once in the morning, once at night. The morning part was the cleaning side of me. She did all the cleaning for me, and the night time was the visit and just chat to me, basically. I spent 7.5 months in the ICU. During that time, I had pneumonia twice, MRSA, collapsed lung. Managed to come through that eventually at the other end, 7.5 months. Still paralysed though, and still with the tracheotomy, helping me to breathe on a ventilator. They moved me upstairs to respiratory, which I spent another 7 months up there. They did very well with me. The physios there, they got me off the tracheotomy eventually. It took a long time. They got me off that. I was then moved to a ward where I was going to start doing physio, and I don't know how long I spent there. Probably 5 months, 6 months.
You were until May.
Yeah, I was into May this year, and
You were being hoisted.
I was being hoisted out of bed, everything else, until they got me on a frame, lifting me out of bed, putting me on a frame, trying to learn me to walk, and so on and so on. I came home because I've got no grip on my hands, as you can see. It's also affected all my knuckles and everything else, and I can't clench a fist or hold anything. I came home and still getting through the physio. I was out for 8 weeks. Using a wheelchair, using a hand frame and crutches. And I managed to fall over, fracture my hip, and I was back in hospital again for a plate and 3 screws to be fitted to my hip.
Because it's something to your bone density.
It was to do with bone density. I managed to get over the fracture quite quickly. That was nothing compared to what I had gone through. So I managed to get over that, and I'm still now learning to walk. I've got damage in my feet and my legs, which are numb all the time, and I get pins and needles. And obviously, I still can't use my hands, so using crutches, I have to be very careful as well.
So, Tony, if I can just come back in, so just to make it very clear, you spent well over a year in hospital. Well, you're talking about a 7-month stint in ICU, followed by 7 months in a respiratory ward, and that's 14 months, and then extra time on a ward with physiotherapy. So how long have you spent in hospital altogether?
It was
14.5 months.
I think you've just got mixed up with that.
Yeah, 14.5 months altogether, Brian.
But you're still in the physio rehab now.
I'm still in the physio rehab now, so I attend every single week,
Right. And Tony,
That's still a
you
long time.
don't like to ask personal questions, but I think you're about 55. Is that correct?
I'm 59 now.
59.
60.
Okay. And can you just tell us what you were doing when you were working? What was your job?
I was a security manager, managing so many officers, and also the cleaning side. I was facilities. I was doing that as well, managing those. 60 hours a week, Monday to Friday, sometimes 72. I went in at weekends sometimes. Enjoyed the job. It was long hours, but I did enjoy it.
Right. And so that was quite an active job.
Yeah.
Physically, that was a physical job that you were doing.
It was, yes. I'd have to walk around site all over the place, so I could do about 3 mile a day walking.
Right. So when you first started to experience the symptoms that you've described, how long did it take before you actually got a diagnosis via the hospital, via the NHS? I know that Nicola was doing a lot of research, and you've mentioned the transverse myelitis, but when did you actually get a diagnosis from the hospital itself that you were suffering from a vaccine adverse reaction?
I think it was about a week. I was sent down to, like I say, I was sent down to ICU after going into the assessment ward. It took about a week.
They said it was Guillain-Barré then.
They said it was Guillain-Barré then.
But they didn't say it was vaccine induced.
But they didn't. Yeah, they didn't say it was vaccine induced at first.
Well, and
It was just induced.
I'm sorry, did they ever say it was vaccine induced, or what were you actually
Eventually,
being told?
Yeah, one doctor did. Apparently, one doctor
when
did.
your proteins were out.
Yeah, when he did the lumbar puncture and did the tests, that was when the doctor came to him and he says, "We believe it's vaccine induced."
Right.
But
And
nothing
did that go on the written records?
It has gone on your critical reports, yes.
It is on my critical reports now.
As post
Right.
AstraZeneca.
It's put down as post AstraZeneca.
GBS.
Oh, okay. And did the hospital submit a yellow card form for you?
We don't know.
According to my wife, she didn't
tell
know
me.
nothing about the yellow card.
I did it myself. Yeah.
Nicky looked into this, found out that you're supposed to have a yellow card filled in, and she did it herself. So our doctor didn't even do it.
But they didn't tell me they did one.
Right. Okay.
But
So when you did that, because I know you're sitting there with Tony, that's fine, Nicola. When you submitted that card, what response did you get from the MHRA?
Just a standard response. They received it, and they were sorry for what has happened. Then I had to update the yellow card because Tony's condition worsened, so I updated him with his condition that he'd been moved into critical and ventilated. Again, it was just an automated response. Sorry to hear this, we've received it, but I could never get any more information from them with that.
Right. So
we have asked, Sir Christopher Chope has asked the MHRA to release the findings.
Yeah.
On the people that's been affected, and they won't. So, and Genomics have had his DNA for research, and I've tried to contact Genomics and find out any findings from that, but that's been unsuccessful too.
Okay, so you end up spending this protracted length of time in hospital, and you've come out and you've still got what seemed to me to be quite severe disabilities. What help have you received? I mean, how do you cope now? How do you pay the bills? How do you get by?
I have received.
It took us ages and ages to go through the benefit system.
Yeah.
And the benefit system, I had to keep going for work interviews, job coach work interviews, whilst he was in hospital. And obviously the benefits was nowhere near what his wage was. So I managed to get through the time he was in hospital with help from family, financially. Then Tony receives PIP now, personal independence payment. But again, it's nowhere near what his wage used to be. And he, through battling, he actually got awarded from the VDPS, the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme.
Right.
And that now is at the point is helping us to pay bills, because obviously PIP isn't enough to pay the bills. And we've actually got pay now for, obviously we pay for a stair lift.
Yeah.
We're having the bathroom adapted. That's why we're actually not at home now, because the bathroom is being adapted for Tony. And we're using that to pay for these things.
Right. And can I ask, when you were caught up in the midst of this, you didn't get any help back from the MHRA. Where was the first place? Okay, and the benefits you've talked about, were there any other organisations that you turned to for some help?
I went to the Gaines charity. They didn't acknowledge vaccine caused it. And I knew from reading the peer-reviewed studies that I'd read that it had caused, GBS had been caused through vaccine in the past. And this was the only charity there for Guillain-Barré syndrome. So myself and another person through the group we met through Hosfeld lawyers, in VIB UK, we found the same, that they got the same from Gaines charity: no support, no acknowledgement the vaccine had caused this, which we found absurd, because then as I was looking into things, I heard that a Professor Lunn was on the board of directors there, and this Professor Lunn is the neurologist, I believe, at UCL,
Right.
University College London. I believe they have been advising government. We actually spoke as well, Brian, to a BBC reporter when Tony came out of hospital. And he has actually been to our home and he has recorded with Tony, and the BBC won't run it.
It wasn't sure.
How may I ask how long ago that was, just as a matter of interest?
It was when he came, about the end of May, when he came out of hospital.
Yeah.
This BBC reporter had been following the immunoglobulin database and saw there was a shortage. Well, that's what they use when they give IVG treatment.
I had IVG and
plasma. And it has to be recorded on a immunoglobulin database when that treatment is given. And I saw a peer review study that showed that it did rise when the vaccination started. I put all this to the reporter, and the reporter put this to this Professor Lunn, who was very condescending to him, told him he needed a lesson into statistics. And then I found that he was on I believe he is on this board of directors with the Gain charity too.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, yes, that's why they're not saying that it's the vaccine. And then I also come across he has a conflict of interest with AstraZeneca too. So the corruption there, to me, was speaking volumes. So my trust completely went in all the systems.
Right.
She also wrote to 40 MPs and not one MP commented back.
Got back. So just none of all this has added up along the way for us. And then it was only through the pressure of putting these papers to this BBC reporter and him putting them to this Professor Lunn. By October, then they announced that Guillain-Barré was on the adverse reactions on the MHRA.
That was October.
And that was October.
Right.
All this has been suppressed in the media.
So did you try and chase that BBC reporter to see why he wasn't running the story?
Yeah. He says he had said their lawyers come into it. They wouldn't let him run this. They wouldn't let him say that. He wanted to take it somewhere else. Constantly. So the BBC, and he's been adamant he wanted to get the story out. But the BBC won't run it.
Yeah.
Right. So
That's as far as I've got with that. But we
Nicola,
wanted to warn people.
I'm sorry, I've interrupted you there. Carry on.
We just wanted to warn people of what symptoms to look out for, because we hadn't got a clue what was happening to Tony.
These symptoms weren't on the sheet that they showed me before the vaccine. It was just a normal thing of maybe nausea, feeling a bit tired, headaches maybe. That was all I saw on that sheet.
They weren't giving out any symptoms, what to look out for, and how bad Tony was. That's dangerous, and that's dangerous for the rest of the public.
Yes. And of course, it's happened to a great many people who have been vaccinated.
There's 509 cases, that's it, on the AstraZeneca data print.
Saying that people
and 5 deaths
reported the GPS, and 5 deaths. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's a massive increase. There was 52 cases when Tony was admitted in March 21.
Yeah.
And that has risen to 509 since then.
And they still say it's rare.
And Tony, I think I'm right. Tony, I think I'm right in saying there were other men on the ward who had similar conditions to yours.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. Every time we saw a doctor, they were saying, this is rare, this is really rare. But there was 2 people across from me who had the same condition as me, GBS. Yeah.
But they didn't tell us about them.
They wouldn't tell us about that, which is, I can understand that, patient confidentiality, you can't do that.
But it's a local area.
And it's a local area, and they didn't know my wife was going to talk to one of those guys as soon as he left hospital.
And I spoke to one of them who was actually in the hospital.
Yeah, so...
Yeah.
But he didn't go as severe as Tony.
He didn't go as severe as me.
Tony, did you get the opportunity to talk to any of the other patients so that you were able to talk on a sort of one-to-one basis to find out what had happened to the others?
None, because one, I had the tracheotomy and so I couldn't speak anyway. I was
lip reading with me.
Lip reading with my wife, and
I was passing things.
She was passing things on to me, and so on. I'd just like to say, Brian, there was one situation when I was in hospital, and I was lying in bed and I couldn't move, I couldn't talk, and they used to leave the door open in the summer, the fire door, just to keep it cool in the ward, which I understood, for the nurses. And there's this one particular night, this guy walked in.
Off the street.
No, he didn't have any kind of uniform on or any hospital uniform. He was in civilian clothes. He walked to the bottom of my bed where he was met by a nurse. And he said to the nurse, "You made me do this." And then stabbed himself in the chest and killed himself. He actually died that night. I didn't know at the time how vulnerable I was.
Because you were in that much pain.
Because I couldn't move and I couldn't talk. So if they'd come to me, that'd have been it.
You couldn't raise your hands.
I know through drugs and everything else, I did suffer from hallucinations. I know that. But I know this wasn't a hallucination because the nurse spoke to my wife about it as well, saying that there's been an incident. Right. And I had already told my wife what the incident was.
They were concerned what you'd seen.
Yeah, they were concerned, yeah.
Tony, Nicola, just have to say gently, just when you're speaking, just one at a time, please.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it just makes it a little bit difficult for the audience listening. Your interaction together is perfect, but just try not to speak over each other. That is an incredible story. Just tell us again. Say it again, Tony, if you would, and then Nicola, just add what you'd like to about your contact with the nurse.
So I was lying in bed one night, middle of summer, paralysed, couldn't talk. They used to leave the fire exit door open, slightly ajar, just to let the cool wind in, the nurses, which I understood. This one particular night, a gentleman walked in. He had no hospital uniform on, so I knew he didn't work for the hospital. He had civilian clothes on, walked to the bottom of my bed, and he was met by a nurse who asked him what he was doing there, and he just turned around and said, "You made me do this," and proceeded to stick a knife in his chest. The guy did die that night. I asked the nurse about it, and I know I was on drugs when I was in hospital, loads of drugs, and I did hallucinate in there, but I knew this wasn't a hallucination. The reason I know is because they contacted my wife and said there'd been an incident in hospital, and they were concerned for me, or what I saw. And I remember the nurse asking me, "What did you see? Are you okay? Do you feel okay? You know, do you need to talk to anybody?" And they also spoke to Nikki as well, but I'd already told Nikki anyway when she first came in to see me before the nurse came to her.
Right. So
Yeah, so that was
go
yeah.
ahead,
So
Nicola.
Brian, the nurse actually rang me and said, "There's been an incident. Nothing. Tony's okay, but we'll speak to you when you come in to see him." So when I went in, I'd already seen Tony, and he says, "Oh, a man stabbed himself at the bottom of my bed," and I went, "What?" And I thought, he can't be seeing things. But then the nurse came to me and she says, "We did have an incident, and we've spoken to Tony because we're concerned of what he saw and how he'd be." And I just assured him that Tony has got a very strong character. Normally the work he did, because he was in security, he came up across a few hair-raising moments, you know what I mean? So he was quite used to dealing and with public. I assured them he was okay, but they did send a psychologist, did come in onto the ward to speak to Tony through that time. But then it wasn't until later when he came home, I think, that he realised how vulnerable he was, because he was lying there, he couldn't even raise his hands. So if that guy had turned to him, he'd got no chance of doing anything. But, you know, it was a time where I think if these patients weren't being listened to, like Tony wasn't being listened to, Tony wasn't admitted straight away. We had to battle to get Tony in the hospital.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine if somebody else was being left, not being seen to properly, how that, because Tony would have died if he hadn't got in that hospital.
Definitely.
So that is the fact, and how poorly he was and had the pain he was in. I don't know what other people were going through at that time either. So, but no, it wasn't a very nice experience on top of everything else he was dealing with. To have to.
I find it incredible what you've just told me. Without going into all the details, many years ago there was an incident in a hospital in Plymouth which involved my mother-in-law, and as a result of that, there was a major inquiry around what had happened to her, and part of that inquiry was to do with unknown persons appearing on the ward. But the point I want to make is that resulted in a full investigation, and ultimately, sadly, my mother-in-law died, and the coroner's inquest, a number of facts came out. But what I learnt from the whole tragic incident was that at least there was a formal investigation into it. You were telling me what happened, and what I'm thinking immediately is, where is the investigation into that incident, and have you been provided with any formal report?
There's been no opportunity. There's been no opportunity for that at all, Brian. Through any of this, we have still constantly just had the battle to deal with getting through what we're going through now in the VDPS, which we're still battling to reform and change to help people and help the others. So, but we haven't had the opportunity to even speak about this.
Yeah,
right.
This is only with the likes of yourselves and also GB News we've spoken with, and we have been hit with brick walls at every opportunity, which again we find sinister, absurd.
You class as anti-vaxxers if you say anything, but we're not. I'm not.
You know, he actually went for it, so you can't even say that. You know, But
Yes.
then to be shut down the way we have with everything, and that isn't just us, that is our group VIB UK, who we set up with the people who've been affected. All our group have diagnosis or death certificates, sadly.
Yeah.
We have been trying to change and reform the VDPS to help people. We've also been trying to get this acknowledged publicly that people aren't getting diagnosed still. There's still GPs and doctors in hospitals who aren't acknowledging this vaccine injury with people. They're just sending them for tests or saying they've got a viral.
Yeah.
Right.
They're not really diagnosing it.
What about your own GP? What role did they play?
We've never seen our own GPs still to this day. They've never been in touch and asked to see Tony or support him. We've had to go and ring them for medical situations at the moment with Tony still. And when we go up there, we normally see a training doctor or a stand-in doctor. We've never, ever seen our original GPs.
No.
From the day one. But I did complain to our GP because they didn't prioritise Tony when we rang the surgery twice.
Yeah.
Right.
And we haven't seen.
Are you just able to tell us the area that you're in, and are you able to name the hospital for us?
Yeah, we're in Stoke-on-Trent, and it is Royal Stoke.
Right. Okay.
University Hospital.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I'd just like to jump back. The BBC initially got involved, but then didn't report. But you were, I think, a little bit later able to talk to the Daily Mail. How did they react to what you told them?
I went through. I actually got in touch, Brian, with somebody who wrote about 4 cases in Nottingham of GBS that had occurred, and I emailed the guy who wrote on that, and then they put me in touch with our local reporter, who then rang and spoke to us, and it was when I spoke to him that they picked up off that local paper, because I believe they're all connected, and it went through quite a few major tabloids, Daily Mail, Mirror. They picked up off that local reporter what he did. And then you actually spoke to him to do a bit of a follow-up, didn't you, yourself, when you come out? Because, like I say, the BBC reporter had followed us since March, April, May. I'd been speaking to him in 21, and he followed us all year. He followed it all year. He knew that there was GBS cases, and he knew Tony had been awarded, but the BBC still wouldn't run Tony's story.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't even entertain the BBC. I know the government ran. I know they're all being told what to do and what they can and can't do. And that isn't right.
No, it's not right at all. So how did you manage to come? You've mentioned Sir Christopher Chope briefly, and of course recently there was a should have been a very important all-party parliamentary group meeting about vaccines and vaccine damage. How did you come into contact with Sir Christopher Chope?
It was via Hosfold. Like I say, our group have tried to go about things all the right way. We haven't, Sir Christopher Chope come on board and supported our campaign. And he's been trying endlessly to get support from other MPs, which a few more MPs have come on board and been helping their constituents. Sadly, ours hasn't helped us.
No.
We've asked her to attend the APPG meeting. We've, sent her when the debate was coming up with Sir Christopher Chope, because he put a private vaccine damage bill in. So we've tried to get the support of MPs, but some MPs just won't put their head above the parapet on this, which I think is sad, because they should be there to help their constituents and support their constituents.
Yes. Did you
we're not
both
getting that from them.
Did you both attend that all-party parliamentary group meeting?
We
You
actually,
did?
yeah, we actually Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did.
We travelled in, even though we're away, we travelled into it because we thought it was important that people see that Tony isn't just a story, and neither is everybody else. They're people.
And there was a lot of people there.
You know, there's people's lives here that have been affected massively.
Right.
And
Tony, how did you feel that meeting went?
Well, there was two separate groups there. There was us with the Viv UK, our guys, and there was another group there,
UKCV.
the UKCV. They were more, should I say, vocal.
We weren't sure what to expect.
Yeah, we weren't sure what to expect from the meeting anyway. But Sir Christopher Chope really did. He did well. He did really good. And he had Dr. Malhotra there, who's a top cardiologist in the UK. And he was there and he spoke about big pharma companies, Pfizer and AstraZeneca, because his father actually died from a heart attack after the, I think it was the AstraZeneca.
He believes after the
He
booster,
believes
yes.
it was that.
We didn't know what to expect from the APPG. We hadn't been one before.
No.
We just know it was hopefully draw attention to the other MPs to say, look, this is what's happening. This is what's happening to people. We hope that we get the opportunity to speak more about personally what's happened to ourselves, but we have registered hopefully to speak within the COVID inquiry at some point with Baroness Hallett and following that route too, because like I say, this is people's lives it's affected and they can't just brush this under the carpet. Like now, we're not hearing nothing about what AstraZeneca has done.
Yeah.
We know that Pfizer has caused myocarditis and pericarditis, but AstraZeneca has also caused injuries. So they need to start being a bit more upfront with the public about this.
Yes. Well, certainly UK Column agrees with that, and we've worked very hard over the last 18 months to try and give people a voice as to what's been happening. And I think we're allowed to say we've been quite successful in getting professionals to speak out. So we've covered groups of doctors, some international, some based in UK, but people who've spoken out with their concerns about the whole of the vaccine agenda and the fact that there is no follow-up on what the real damage that's been done and what the adverse effects are. We were also able to interview Dr. Christian Perron, a French doctor who originally was in charge of the whole of the vaccine system in France. And in a very candid interview with us, he said that he thought that what was happening was crazy. We've been able to talk to experienced professionals who've worked inside the pharmaceutical industry itself, and they've given us testimony that the timescales that were used in order to create these vaccines were so short that the firms concerned couldn't possibly have been able to meet the safety considerations. So we have put forward a lot of professional groups, UK-based, US-based, a mix internationally. We did a specialist event with a French group, which included Christian Perron again, and other professionals on the side, including now some GPs here in UK. And all of them are saying effectively that it's outrageous that the government will not engage over the fact that their evidence clearly shows that a very large number of people have been injured as a result of vaccines. And unfortunately, the statistics appear to show that several thousand people have died. So we have also experienced the stone wall that you mentioned. And this really is outrageous. And of course, it leads us and a great many other people to believe that the government are desperate to cover something up. Do you think that's a fair comment, Tony, or do you think it's a bit strong?
I think you're spot on there, Brian, actually. I do think the government are definitely covering something up. We've got to remember this vaccine hasn't even got a license from the medical council. I don't think they'll ever get a license. I think.
But then it's just it's mad how they're doing it. Why would they do this to children who don't need it?
Yeah.
Why would they be pushing this still without having these upfront discussions? It's just so sinister and corrupt, and it's like Big Pharma are deciding government policy.
Yeah, that's what it seems like to us.
Yes.
The pharma companies are.
It's like MHRA are funded by pharma. Yeah. So we're not going to get any findings off the MHRA because Big Pharma fund them. If they don't want them to release it, they're not going to release it, which is wrong in itself. They're supposed to be, it needs to be independent.
Yes, what you say is absolutely correct. The MHRA are clearly in bed with the pharmaceutical companies. The fact they claim to be a regulator and a safety regulator, from everything we've seen, and we've had a lot of correspondence with them, they always refuse to answer the questions, or else you're given what I call a fob-off reply, a dismissive reply, that they do not want to engage on the issue of vaccine safety. Tony, it must be very difficult for you to look back and you think about the day you had that vaccination, but you were like a great many other people. You followed the government's advice, and we know from talking to other people who've been vaccinated that a great many of them did it because they felt it was the right thing to do, and they were, many of them, concerned about protecting elderly relatives and things. So how do you now feel about the fact that you had a vaccination and then you suffered as a result of that? What would you say to the government about your experience?
They've ruined my life. They've ruined my working life. They've ruined my social life. They've ruined part of my family life. If it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't be here, I don't think. I wish something had happened that I wouldn't have taken that vaccine. I can't turn back time now.
More information.
Yeah, I wish I'd looked more into vaccines and what they can do and what side effects you can get off vaccines. I may have decided not to have the vaccine. I mean, I was, like you say, we were all following the government guidelines. The big lie of protect yourself and protect others. We all know now that it doesn't protect others. You can still pass the virus on, even if you were vaccinated or not. It doesn't matter. You'll still pass it on, and you'll still catch it. So
I won't trust government again. It's I can't believe how gullible I was to believe what they were saying in the first place. So it's lost my trust in government and GPs.
And not only that, Brian, it doesn't. It's not just us who don't trust the government or the NHS or any government-funded organisation. It's now my children and probably my children's children. It runs through the generations. Don't trust them. Don't trust what the government say. Don't trust. I'm always telling my grandkids that. I'm always telling my children that.
Now
I am. I used to trust the government 100% on what they said, but not anymore.
That's why you went for the vaccine.
And that's why I went for the vaccine in the first place.
Well, of course, a key point is that under the NHS, its own rules, the rules of the NHS, it says that people should be able to make an informed choice with pharmaceutical products. And we have also heard time and time again from people that either they weren't given any detail about possible side effects, or those side effects were minimized. Quite a few people didn't receive the paperwork talking about side effects until after they'd been vaccinated. So they describe a pipeline where it was pressure to be vaccinated, and once you'd been jabbed, then you were given the documentation talking about possible side effects. So we can see that across the country, the whole of the vaccination programme was very devious to my mind, devious in the way it was set up. And a lot of, I think even the NHS staff were very gullible in following the guidelines without really thinking through they had a duty to inform people of possible risks.
They feared losing the job if they spoke out, most probably.
Yeah, I had, like I say, I was on the front line, and some of the nurses I saw, one particular one said, "I won't be here next week." I asked her why, and she said, "Because if I don't take the vaccine, I won't have a job. So I'm going to leave the job and go into something else." Wow. You know, I was thinking, well,
And that's when a few nurses left, didn't they, with these mandates. And
yeah, a couple of nurses left, and I think one doctor left as well.
Yeah.
And then 3 days before that deadline, that mandate deadline, the government turned around and said, "No, you don't have to have the vaccine anymore."
And that was because Dr. Steve James went on telly.
Yeah.
And they stopped then the vaccines, didn't they, for the mandates for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so policy was effectively just stopped, reversed almost, and then the government has not engaged, hasn't talked about it, hasn't been challenged by any significant media organisation. It's pretty incredible. I have another question for you, Tony, and that is, what would you like to say to other people who have suffered a vaccine adverse reaction? What would your advice be to them? Or indeed, what's your advice to somebody who's been vaccinated but really only had some mild side effects?
Now, I'd advise them to seek out the truth, because a lot of doctors are saying it's viral or blaming it on something else. We know of people who've had blood clots, and similar symptoms
to those in the group,
from different vaccines to the people who are in our group, and they are now being told that it's a viral or it's something else, or
we've
it's
just got
something
to send
else.
you for tests.
They've got to send you for tests, and that's all they're saying.
Tell them stay strong.
Stay strong, keep going,
and look at the peer review papers.
Yeah, do your studies, look into it, and find out what the truth is.
Because the government won't tell.
And do you feel that the vaccine, as people are coming forward and realising that they are suffering an adverse reaction, do you think that the voluntary groups that are forming are a good place to start to meet other people, to be able to share experiences? Is that a positive thing?
Yeah, definitely. I'll let my wife explain about that one, because she was the one who actually got into the group that we're in.
Viv UK are there campaigning, but also helping to steer people in what to do, where to go, how to go about getting the records, how to go reporting on the yellow report card. Just that background stuff that we hadn't got a clue about. And I suppose these people won't either. So we're just trying to give them direction on what can help them. And we're hoping the government come on board with this and start helping the people who've been injured, or the people who've been bereaved and have lost people through this. There's even children who've lost their parents. They've had no mental support. And these are young children who've lost their mum, their dad, and there's no support through everybody that's been affected.
And the Viv UK, a lot of people, even if they aren't a member of the Viv UK,
no,
still
they're
give
there
advice
to help people. So we're there on Twitter, on Facebook, people can see, and it's the people on the group, it's their stories, what's happened. They'll be able to read them, and they might think their symptoms have been very similar, but it gives them a starting base, to where to go from.
Yes, and we've heard from speaking to other people, Nicola, that a lot of people felt very, very lonely, and in fact afraid when they realised that they had a problem, and they tell us that they didn't know who they could speak to.
they should be able to go to their GP, and their GP should be upfront and honest with them, but GPs aren't being. And that straight away is just so wrong.
Yeah. I'm going to thank you both very much for speaking to me. We think it's important that we try and tell people the truth, and we warn as many people as possible about your experience and the experience of the other people who've been badly affected. But I also wanted to say something else, and that is that when I spoke to Nicola back in the beginning of 2021, it was apparent to me, Nicola, that you were a lady who were not going to stand idly by. And Tony, you've just said that if you hadn't got into hospital at that time, things might have gone sort of badly, worse. So I think that between the two of you, you've looked out for each other extremely well, and that's a very positive thing. I felt after my initial contact that I couldn't possibly appear to pressurize you, so I stayed off to one side. But for many months, I was very worried about what was happening. I think I've got to say that today I'm delighted to see you at home, and you've been smiling, which is a very important thing, albeit you've been through a very, very tough time, but clearly you're a tough guy. What are your plans for the future? Have you got your mind set on things that you'd like to be able to achieve?
At the minute, I'm just testing myself to see how far I can actually walk, but I'm still on crutches at the minute.
Still can't walk.
Still can't walk properly. Still got pins and needles in my legs and my feet. I can't feel those.
Every day is a bonus, isn't it?
Yeah, every day is a bonus, and the small changes happen every month. People notice the small changes, but they're only small changes. So it's a long, long process.
We don't know what the future holds, do we? No doctor can tell you that either.
I'd love to go back to work, but I don't know.
Right.
And no doctor a date of when, what could happen and when it could happen. I don't know. So,
yeah. Well, Tony, Nicola, I'm going to say thank you very much for talking to me today. I've learned a lot from what you've described, and I'm going to say I hope you'll stay in touch with us, because all of you. So I'm going to talk about the community out there now of people who've been affected. It's clear to me that they are starting to work together, and in our own small way of helping to get out the facts and the story for people. We'd like to stay with you and to help if we can.
That'd be brilliant, Brian.
Thank you. That's great.
Okay, Tony, Nicola, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, I could have asked a lot of questions there, but we've learnt over the years that often to get the message out, you keep it as short as possible. But my goodness, you've been through the wars, Tony.
Just a bit. Just a bit.
Yeah.
There's some stages where even I didn't think I was going to make it, Brian. There was a couple of occasions I actually thought that was it. I was going to die.
Yeah.
One thing I should have said in the end.
Well, at the end of the day, you must have also come into contact with some good people in the NHS system.
There was some good nurses,
really,
and some good
really
doctors.
good nurses and doctors.
You know, it's just saying they can't all sing off the same sheet.
Yeah, because they've got different departments. They all got their own budgets, and they have to stick to their budgets. And
it's also how some were really out up front about the vaccine injury.
Yeah, really. some were really up front, some weren't.
Some are
some like dismissing it completely, and I didn't understand that, even though they all work for the same company. But there you go.
Yeah.